There's a ton of mindset issues that kind of need to be worked through in the personal brand space. And one of those things is the realization that you're never going to feel ready. You're never going to feel clear, and clarity is going to come from action. You can think forever and you're not going to be like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do now. Like, I feel really clear on this like one sentence brand statement of mine. Like, that's not how it works. And you're human. And part of what I love about personal branding is you are going to evolve. So I try to get people really comfortable up front with this idea that whatever you're going to say, like you are now, I'm a student and whatever, that's going to change.
One of the quotes I reflect on often is from author William Gibson. He says, "The future is here, it just isn't evenly distributed." One of the ways in which I believe we can democratize more access and exposure to opportunities is through the development of a personal brand. As Seth Godin says, "The internet shines a light on your projects. The only way to prove that you are indispensable, someone worth recruiting, moving to the top of the pile and hiring, is to show, not tell." Projects, he says, are the new resume. If your Google search or your LinkedIn profile isn't what you need it to be, then change it. Change it through your actions and your generosity. Change it by so over-delivering that people post about you. Change it by creating a blog that is so insightful about your area of expertise that others refer to it. This investment in your personal brand, in your portfolio, he says, will pay dividends for years to come. Regardless of where you are in your personal branding journey, today's guest, entrepreneur, personal branding and growth expert, Brittany Crystal, joins us to share the endless possibilities to what we can create by strategically positioning ourselves online so that we can create a more equal distribution where everyone has access to the opportunities today's world has to offer. How does she know this? Because she's done it for individuals such as Gary Vaynerchuk, Marie Forleo, and Tom Bilyeu, to just name a few. She's also the host of the incredible Beyond Influential podcast, where she has in-depth conversations with experts and industry influencers on how they get us to consume content both online and offline. No matter where you are in your journey, Brittany's here to share the tools and strategies to grow your influence, your trust with your audience, and position your personal brand to get the results you want. And I couldn't be more excited to have her here today to share her expertise with all of us. How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin? And how do you develop the mindset and skill set to be successful? Welcome, everyone, to the Sprint to Success with Design Thinking podcast. I'm your host, Saba Kidwai. Join me each week as I share the stories and strategies from the world's leading researchers and practitioners about why they believe the answer lies in practicing design thinking.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been listening to your episodes. You're always so thoughtful and intentional with your story, with your guests. Like, it's an honor to be here. And I also love the title. I want to tell you, I love the alliteration Sprint to Success, but I was thinking about it this morning and I was kind of laughing to myself because I'm like, there's no sprint to success. There are some ways to kind of shortcut a little bit to make things easier on yourself. But I was laughing because I was just like, yeah, there's no sprint.
Brittany highlighted the irony of my podcast title, which is inspired by the authors of Sprint, How to Solve Big Problems and Test New Ideas in Just 5 Days. It's through these small experiments, the cycle of empathy, testing, and iteration, that we're able to confidently take risks as we navigate change and ambiguity. I'm particularly excited to have Brittany with us here today to share how personal branding can help you design your career and your journey. Brittany and I are both graduates of 2007. With both of us having graduated over a decade ago, I still cannot believe that personal branding isn't a core part of the student experience. I asked Brittany to share with us the story of her journey and how she came to being unapologetically herself, carving her own place in the world of work and helping others do so as well.
Personal branding really is about designing your life and your path. And I feel like when we did graduate college, because we graduated, I think at the same time, the world was very different. What I do today definitely didn't exist. And I do think that we build businesses and build solutions that we would have wanted and needed at the time. And so when I look back now, I mean, hindsight is 2020. I realize that my business now is the control and the chaos that I wish I had then, but I didn't know that it existed. So like you said, I kind of went the very traditional path. Like I was telling this on another interview recently, I'd totally forgotten my bat mitzvah theme was colleges. I'm Latina and Jewish, but that was my bat mitzvah theme. Like my life was geared toward you get a good education, you go to a great school. This is where personal branding actually exists before you think you have a personal brand. You're in these places, you're trying to get to these schools that have these brand names and position yourself and network in a way that basically like helps you position yourself for success. That's always kind of existed. That's what the resume was, the cover letter, all of those things. And now we can basically shortcut that with the online space and content and personal branding. But basically my goal was like, go to a great school. And my thought was, okay, like my options in quotes for jobs at the time where it was like, well, lawyer, doctor, live in LA. So it was like, I was interested in entertainment and sports, but how can I take those things that are the traditional safe path, but then also like do something kind of fun? It's one of those things where it's like, it had this focus, this end goal, but I wasn't like, when you get there, what happens? So basically I like kind of rushed through college. I finished in 3 years from UCLA. I thought I was going to take time to travel, but I was like, no, I got to get to this goal of being this successful person. So I ended up I went to Georgetown for law school. I realized during the first year, I did not want to be a lawyer. And now we have, and this is just a side note, we can really investigate and have informational interviews all the time and really figure out what we want to be, what the vision is, where we actually fit. Just because my personality seemed like it might fit with, law better than it would doctor, for example. Had I talked to some lawyers, I probably wouldn't have gone to law school. Like people made it seem like it was this general like education type degree that I could do anything with. And that just wasn't true. And entrepreneurship wasn't like a hot thing. I didn't know anything about business. My father and my mother own a business because my dad's a solo practitioner, ophthalmologist, but they didn't frame it that way. Like the goal was like, go get a safe job and be like inside counsel at Pepsi or at the NBA or one of these places where it's like safe. And basically the recession hit when I was in law school and everybody was canceling their summer programs. And I just wasn't into any of the topics that were being discussed in law school at all. I like the people, but I was like, this is miserable. And so I ended up taking I did my summer associate jobs and I was like, no. Like, I can't do this. Like, I don't know what, and I happened to be during that time, like making great money during those summers. So I knew I was going to have a 6-figure salary, but it didn't matter. I couldn't do it. And so I was like, okay, I never want anyone to take this away from me. I passed the bar and then I was done. And then I started on my path, which is basically like a Goldilocks phase of figuring out where I fit. And I started in entertainment and I went through, and this is one of those things that how the world has shifted. Before, like back then, I was like switching jobs. There was like a 4-year period before we'll talk about Gary Vee and Vayner, before I kind of entered the marketing world, where I had like 4 or 5 different entertainment type jobs in the span of 4 years. And that was like unheard of, basically. And everybody who I went to law school with, that's not like the thing that you do. You don't job hop. You don't like decide that you're unhappy after a year or whatever it might be. Like you stick out and you stay, and like company loyalty. And now that's like such a common thing for people to try on different hats and really see where they fit. And now you can do it. We'll talk about that even easier with personal branding. But basically I was going through these pieces and just, here's the thing is I was so used to like having these goals and having kind of the school set up where it's like, okay, I know what this person wants, and always thinking about the teacher or the boss or that kind of person. And it really doesn't set you up for entrepreneurial thinking. And then you're in the real world and it's like, I don't know, it just kind of hits you in the face. Like you can either figure out what you really want and have those conversations with yourself, or you can kind of get into holes where you're like only answering to this one person or this gatekeeper. And that's another thing is in Hollywood and entertainment, what I love so much about what's going on now is at that time, if a boss or you work for somebody powerful, they can blackball you if they don't like you. If they're the only person who knows your work and has something to say about you, they can make sure you never work in the town again if they want to. And that's something that now we have so much power to create this narrative for ourselves, or prove that we know what we're talking about, that one person's word against yours really doesn't have as much leverage. And so I kind of learned a bunch of those lessons over time. I realized entertainment wasn't for me after going through enough jobs, and I was going to get an MBA. I thought that's what I needed to go into marketing and branding. I was always interested, and I always had like an intuitive sense of what worked like on television. And at that point, this was in 2014, I wasn't even watching TV anymore. I was on my phone. Like social media was happening, and my now husband told me about Gary Vee, and I didn't know who he was, but I looked him up, and he was opening an office in LA. So I picked a job I was hoping I could get, and I applied there. And I was at Vayner doing like project management in their LA office for I think 4 months before I met Gary. And I don't know how in depth you want me to go about this, but basically Gary, we were on the same team at the Christmas party that year. And it was a small office, like 30 people. It was like 4 of us on this bar trivia team. And when he came back the next month, he was like, "You're overqualified for what you do. What do you really want to do?" And I thought I wanted to invest his money. I thought I didn't know really what I wanted to do exactly, but he was about to get, like he told me then, like he was about to get really serious about his personal brand. And I didn't technically know what that meant. I knew he was putting out the content, but he was like, "I'm going to be putting out my new book at that time, like move out, give me a year." And I'd already been to New York, and I was like, well, whatever, I'll do a year. And then I'm going to pitch him a business idea at the end of that year, because I figured I kind of knew I was always going to want to do my own thing, but I didn't know exactly what. And then I fell in love with personal branding like pretty quickly and learned kind of the ins and outs of that, and ended up working on his personal brand, on the personal branding arm of the agency, and then leaving in May 2017 to start my own thing.
As I listen to the journey Brittany took, it's one of continuous curiosity and experimentation. I imagine many of you listening will resonate with Brittany's realization that the world she graduated into was vastly different than the one school had prepared her for. As Brittany shared, hindsight is 20/20. For some of us, those skills and mindsets, such as taking risks, learning from failure, experimentation, creative confidence, and comfort with ambiguity, come naturally. Or we've been fortunate enough to have experiences where we've been able to learn and nurture those skills and mindsets. However, we now know that these skills and mindsets are not optional. It's why I and many others believe so deeply in sharing design thinking frameworks and practices. We can't predict what tomorrow will bring, but we can prepare ourselves with the knowledge, the skills, and mindsets to thrive as we navigate change. I asked Brittany if she knew then what she knew now, what skills and mindsets does she feel allowed her to reach where she is today?
There are a few different pieces. So for me, I think it was kind of nice that I was a good student. And so for me, there was like huge cognitive dissonance that I was successful in the academic world. And like I had, like great test scores and all of these things. And then entering into, in quotes, the real world, like why wasn't that translating? To me, it was like I had confidence, like it does shake you. It's like, am I actually who I think I am? Like, am I actually adding value? Like I had, people have these expectations. I had these expectations for myself and my potential and who I thought I was and who I thought I could be. You definitely go through like a quarter life crisis at that point where it's like, oh my gosh. Well, even in law school, I remember just having those realizations where it's like, I've worked for the last, even though I was a kid, like decade to get here. And I don't know what I want to do. I've never not known what I want to do. But it's like, okay, well, you kind of have that moment where you like either give it a good cry or whatever it is. And then you're like, well, I got to figure it out. And so I'd say I'd always been resourceful. I think it always takes like a second to like feel it. And then you're like, oh, I figured out other things in the past. Why can't I figure this out? Let's start figuring it out. Got to come up with something. And so I think even with the jobs in Hollywood was a thing where I was so distraught after the first thing didn't work out. I really don't think I had encountered very fortunately, I had, in quotes, failed before, but I really had never failed before. And I think the real world and was like my first time where it was like, oh, there is no like linear path. There is no grade system. Even the people that you're working for might not have like the merit basis to even tell you the things that they're telling you or whatever it might be. It was like little pieces over time, because when the first thing didn't work out, again, I was so distraught because I was like, oh my gosh, like this is such a big deal. The rest of my life, I thought I was going to be an agent or whatever. And now what am I going to do? And then I'd go on a job board. So here's the thing. I was always really good, and I do want to say this, at knowing how to position myself to open a door. Because even when it came to college applications, I got into 95% of the colleges I applied to because I did the research on the schools. I'm good at getting inside what the expectation is of like, I'm really strategic in that way. So like I would know what the school kind of wanted, what they'd want to hear, what pieces of my story might align with what they're looking for. I did all of my research on that sort of thing. So when like, let's say I left a job or I lost a job in entertainment, I'd apply for a different one. And I didn't necessarily know anybody there, but I was never without a job for like, I don't even know if it's more than a week. Like I always had a new job on the table, but I didn't expect to have one. So now in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that's part of my gift of what I do and teach people to do. But I didn't get that. And so then the door would open and then that wouldn't work. And then as more things started working and not working, you get disheartened. And then you're like, well, if that didn't work and I was able to do this time, let's try something else. Even in the 3.5 years that I've been in business, I feel like each year has been almost a different type of business. And you're like constantly learning and iterating. And I wouldn't be able to do the things that I currently do now with the mindset had I not had it so hard at the beginning. I don't think I would have appreciated it. I don't think everybody's meant for entrepreneurship by any stretch of the imagination, but me in particular, I think knowing myself, and this comes with having jobs. If I didn't have bosses, and the bosses probably that I particularly did, I wouldn't know that I will never go work for somebody else again. And this isn't offensive to them. It's like my personality. It does, like the more autonomy I got, the more I wanted. And that's just who I am. And I needed those experiences to really appreciate like, okay, I got to take this learning and then adjust it. I never took the same thing twice.
The gap between the academic world and the real world is one that we all grapple with. From K-12 to higher education, the past year with the pandemic has brought this lack of relevancy to the forefront, leaving everyone questioning, how might we reinvent education? One particular phrase Brittany shared was, how will I figure this out? It's a key question, and one of the things about that question is that it begins with optimism. Another design thinking mindset Brittany highlights is the importance of learning from failure, understanding that her first try wasn't the last try. Another area Brittany highlights is the importance of knowing how to position yourself. What are your strengths and how do you showcase them to the world? Brittany brings to the forefront the importance of developing self-awareness, one of the 5 social-emotional pillars identified by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Each experience reinforced what she knew about her strengths and interests. At a time when our lives and the world as we know it has been disrupted, I asked Brittany to tell us how might we develop our personal branding as an avenue to autonomy so that we can control the chaos as we navigate change.
I do see a personal brand as an insurance policy, but I also see it, we're going to talk about how to actually like find and be found, because it's a great way to increase your self-awareness. But I realized like had I known about personal branding, let's say, and I'd been living in the world that we're in during my first job, it's a way to start developing your voice and be creative and really figure out who you are outside of the day-to-day. We just get so caught up in the day-to-day grind and maybe answering to a manager, answering to the thing or doing the job that we don't take the time to even have our own thoughts. We're so busy like trying to be ahead of the person we're working with or for or whatever that might be, that we don't. That's been a big thing now is I talk to people, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and they haven't stopped or even developed a voice because they haven't even asked themselves like, what makes them happy? What do they actually want? Like, what are their skill sets? What are their strengths? All of these things that you think are kind of like a base level, but it's like you kind of just get thrown into it and you get into these habits and you don't think about it. Like you're saying, I love LinkedIn for that reason. I love that it's open to 14 plus at this point. And listen, if you're a student or a young person, that is such a gold mine. I always say, like, you can, high level people at any corporation, entrepreneurs, whoever, love talking to people in their love talking to young people. If you are a young person, like, please use that to your advantage. If I ever talk to anybody who's like in college or high school, I was like, now is the time. People love this. Like, they want to talk to you. And I think so many, like if you're 14, you might be like, oh, this person doesn't want to talk to me. They're too busy. Guess what? They won't talk to me maybe, or like an adult, but they will talk to you. Like, this is the time to do those, like even the podcast that I love doing, it's really in-depth. It's almost like in-depth informational interviews where I like just really dig in. That's what this is. And so even having access to podcasts like this, you don't need to wait until you're whatever established even means to you, or whatever success even means to you. Like, now's the time. I didn't know what success meant to me. And you need to kind of go through those things. When I started, I thought it was a certain amount of money. And then as soon as you kind of hit that, it's like, oh, that wasn't it. Well, I have no other ideas. You can start iterating on that now. And you can even, you can probably start doing internships or create opportunities. I know we're, in a pandemic time where everything's online. Even if you're 16, I don't know what the age is that you can actually have a job or internship, depending on what state you're in. But it's like, why not kind of start like a little side hustle or start reaching out to people and having those conversations? And LinkedIn, like at least LinkedIn has that professional vibe. So if you are professional or like positioning yourself in a way that's professional but enthusiastic, like I said, people want to talk to you. I think that's another thing people get hung up on is the lack of experience. Enthusiasm compensates for lack of experience every time.
Find and be found. It's a mantra I believe every individual should adopt. While we often think of personal branding as something for someone who wants to be an influencer, it does a disservice to the larger purpose it can provide: understanding our voice and leaning into our strengths to showcase them to the world. Brittany highlights the importance of students and new graduates leveraging the LinkedIn platform. As a recent graduate of the Global Executive Doctoral Program at the University of Southern California, I can attest to the power of what Brittany shares. Because when as a student you reach out to connect and learn from others, there is an incredibly welcoming response on the other side. And while this can often feel intimidating, and Brittany shares a key mindset shift we should all remember: enthusiasm trumps experience. The power in saying, I'm a student and I'd like to, is one that once you experience, you'll realize the possibilities are endless. I asked Brittany to share some actionable strategies for how we can develop clarity around our voice as we create our personal brand.
There's a ton of mindset issues that kind of need to be worked through in the personal brand space. And one of those things is the realization that you're never going to feel ready. You're never going to feel clear, and clarity is going to come from action. You can think forever and you're not going to be like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do now. Like, I feel really clear on this like one sentence brand statement of mine. Like, that's not how it works. And you're human. And part of what I love about personal branding is you are going to evolve. So I try to get people really comfortable up front with this idea that whatever you're going to say, like you are now, I'm a student and whatever, that's going to change. But you have to make the commitment. And so the thing, I think it's a misconception about personal branding is that it is about you. It's not all about you. It's technically about your audience. And I do think it's like a symbiotic relationship and it's a balance. And so you're going to choose a starting point. And where I like for people to start, well, first, if you have your name, you should basically I like for people to Google themselves and get their names on all of the platforms, get your website, do all of those things at the very base level. It's like, if you don't want to be on every platform, create content everywhere, I'm platform agnostic and I'm about the path of least resistance. So at very least, get your name settled, basically. Like and just see kind of like, do you have a presence at all on any platforms? If you do have a presence on platforms, like, is your messaging, if you do have any messaging, cohesive? Like, does it make sense? And then I'm always thinking, like, if I'm a stranger and I land on your website, how would you want me to feel? Would I know immediately that you're right for me and what you do and who you are? Again, this depends on where you are and kind of do you own a business, what you do. But if you're a student, just owning kind of that portion. But where I start with people is really, so I say that there's two halves to clarity. And true brand clarity is where your understanding and your audience's understanding of your brand meet. So there's the internal side and the external side. But you have to start with the internal. And the internal to me is really focusing, like, you do have to, this is the part where you need to think through on your own, like focusing on you and ask specific questions around, okay, well, what would be the vision for your personal brand? What do you want it to do for you? And I like to do, like, not only like, let's say 5 or 10 years, but like in the next 90 days, what is it that you'd like to do? Would you like to get comfortable creating content? Like something even just small, just to establish, why are you building the personal brand? And focusing on, what does success look like for you in general and in the brand space? Or with a lot of entrepreneurs, so it's like, what do you, depending on related to their business. But I think, what are your strengths? What is your vision? Why are you doing this? Focusing on the baseline, like, what solution do you offer? What audience do you want to talk to? And you don't even need to, here's the thing about the audience too, that's going to change, because at the end of the day, influence requires at least one other person. Like, you're going to need people, like real humans. You are going to end up talking to people. That's just the end of it. So once you kind of establish those, like, okay, this is what success is, this is what I want from it, this is the vision, because you need some sort of direction, like just in general, even if it's just like where you are today to where you want to be, at least start with where you are today, so we can move you to where you want to be 90 days from now. And so it's kind of going through those questions. And the goal for me is usually trying to get people to a one sentence brand compass statement, where you can say who you are, who you serve, what problem you solve, how you do it, and why. So then you can start using that for audience research, because guess what? Your brand is actually not about you. So this is where you're going to start putting yourself out there and talking to those people. So if you're a student, maybe it's getting in front of these certain people who do what you want to be doing, or you think you want to be doing, and positioning yourself that way. And then you're going to start having actual conversations. And this is where the true clarity comes in, because as you're talking to people, and I do the thing where I make you pick one person, one focus. You cannot be focused on everyone. You need to kind of focus and eliminate. Like with me, I focused on entertainment. I picked the lane and I was like, okay, agency. I was like, okay, actually that's out. Management, do I like that? No, that's out. It's kind of like that. Production, nope, that's out. So that way you can kind of eliminate, so that way you don't go back. And sometimes that takes time, but focusing on one target audience, and that's going to change too, because I don't care how long you've been in business, as you start talking to actual humans that kind of fit that, whatever that like ideal person is that you're thinking about, you're going to be like, oh, actually, like, I thought I wanted to work with people who worked in corporate, but actually I really like small business owners, or like, oh, they'll have these kinds of personality traits. You're going to fail with that, if that makes sense. It's never going to be perfect. You're never going to know exactly who you like talking to and working with until you actually start having those conversations. And then depending on who you work with, you're going to learn all sorts of new things. So it's this constant balance of, okay, I had these conversations with these 3 to 5 people. I like this, don't like this. Let me adjust who I'm going after. Let me adjust. And it's also about being able to clearly communicate to those people. And so when you're having these conversations, these aren't sales calls. You're like asking them whatever it might be about their pain points or the solution you offer. Again, depending who you are. If you're a student, you can just be inquisitive and just ask whatever, like get the information you want, build the relationship. It's basically just to build the relationship, but then you go back and you refine, like, let's say your one sentence. And that's just how it goes over time, bit by bit. It's things that like I do myself now. Like this is a journey forever. Like clarity is not a goal. Like I think that's something that I haven't said, but that's the truth. You're never going to be done.
As I listen to Brittany, I hear her say, "My ongoing journey in developing clarity provides me with the autonomy to navigate change and ambiguity." As she emphasizes, clarity comes from action, and our ability to take action comes from having a growth mindset. Brittany shares that as we develop that clarity, we meet at the intersection of how we see our brand and how our audience perceives our brand. Brittany essentially walked us through the design thinking process, starting with the empathy lens for ourselves and those we wish to serve, setting small, actionable goals within a time frame to help us take steps to creating clarity. And this isn't just for those who are new to personal branding. This is a valuable exercise for anyone with a brand as they continuously reflect on their voice. Ultimately, influence is about trust. As you share who you are, what problem you solve, and who you serve, you build trust with your audience as someone they can turn to when they need that expertise and advice. It's one of the themes I noticed during the pandemic. People needed answers, and in those moments, we don't always have time to do extended research. So we turn to those we trust to ask them for advice, to bring them in to consult, to ask them for references, and lean into their expertise as we navigate change. So, what's your one sentence? Whether you're getting started or whether you have an established brand, do you and your audience have clarity in answering who you are, what problem you solve, and who you serve? As you think about the answers, you might also be wondering where the best place is to start. And one of the resources I want to recommend is Brittany's 5-day LinkedIn challenge. It's the perfect free design sprint to take you from idea to action. I asked Brittany to tell us, why is LinkedIn such a great place for people to start?
LinkedIn is a great place for someone to start because I feel like the algorithm there is great because the content is super low pressure, because for so long people did see it as this professional platform. It really wasn't about content creation. They had articles, but that was about it. And so young people especially have an advantage here because they're not used to content. And so because people aren't used to producing content on the platform, it's taken a second for people to start producing content on the platform. So there are way fewer content creators, which means if you do create content, they want to serve that content to other people. Like they want that out there. LinkedIn needs the content to keep people on the platform. So you can actually expand your reach way beyond your network that way and get it seen in front of decision makers and tastemakers and people that you didn't know you could even get in front of, because all of those people have profiles. Everybody, like people, if you are in the influencer space, it's like up and down. Anyone who works at any company, they all have LinkedIn for professional purposes, but they're on the platform. So you can get in front of these people that it's hard to get in front of anywhere else. And I think that you can also, what I also love about it is that comments count as content. And so let's say you're not comfortable posting a video of yourself, or maybe you feel like, oh, like I don't know enough or have enough experience to feel comfortable putting out, in quotes, advice or whatever it might be, however you think about content. What you can do is show interest in the people that you do want to meet and comment if they're creating content on their stuff, or say something insightful on other people's content that they're following, because that shows up in other people's feeds. And so the most important part of the profile is the picture and that like one line statement, because when you are commenting, that's what people see. So it's like if you're a student interested in XYZ fields, it's like put that. And then they see, and it's like, okay, this is a student who is interested in this thing, and they just said something really smart. Maybe they can come intern for me. Maybe that's, and here's the thing is people create roles for you. Like when I went to work for Gary, I don't think I had a job title. I think it was like growth hacker. I didn't even ask about a job title. I didn't care. It was like you kind of design your own role. And we are in a world where, like, I think about like even hiring for my own team. I'm going to need somebody to help me with content. That's probably going to grow into a full-time role. But if I see that potential in someone, like, let's create it. I think there's a lot of people who are open to this idea of like, it's not just like you're a lawyer and you do these specific things. It's like, hey, I have these skill sets, or I can learn those skill sets. I'm excited about this. I think your business needs it, or whatever it might be, or you build those relationships. So that's why I like LinkedIn, is because you can get in front, especially, I guess you can get in front of really anybody, but say things in a way that will be smart and be strategic, even if you're not trying to necessarily be, in quote, smart and strategic, but it gets in front of those people that you probably wouldn't be in a room with. And now, given the times that we're in, we're not in rooms with really anybody.
Personal branding is about opening pathways. I particularly appreciate how Brittany reframes the narrative about content creation and why we should all see ourselves as content creators. She reminds me of a line from Thomas Friedman's Thank You for Being Late, where he shares, "The time of static stability has passed us by. That does not mean we cannot have a new type of stability, but the new type of stability is dynamic stability. It's like riding a bike," he says, "where you cannot stand still. But once you are moving, it actually gets easier." It's not our natural state, but humanity, he says, has to learn to exist in this state. Sharing our work with the world, putting ourselves out there, is definitely not everyone's natural state. In fact, it can often feel like being in quite a vulnerable state. However, as Brittany reminds us, clarity comes from action. And a personal brand is like riding a bike. As you get moving, it gets easier. I asked Brittany to share some advice that she has on helping us move from static to dynamic stability as we think about our personal brands.
Yeah, so that's what I do love about LinkedIn too, is it does favor some types of content sometimes, but I like that you can do video, you can write, you can do whatever kind of medium you prefer and have it actually show up in front of other people. And so for me, if you don't love video, have you start with video. What do you like? And you mentioned it before, but in terms of people are so daunted by this idea of content creation, where I like people to start so that way they can start developing their voice is really consuming content around the area or like whatever it might be, whether it's news related to your industry or whatever thought piece that you're reading and consuming as you're kind of going through. And like even sharing that and giving one original thought, that's a piece of content. Don't read other people's thoughts on it necessarily, but whatever the article is or whatever it might be, or if you have a thought in relation to someone else's thought, write about that or talk about that or share about that. That's how you start developing your voice. But you need to be processing the information that you're thinking and just letting yourself have an original thought. People want to be thought leaders and then they're just saying what somebody else thinks. I try to get people to actually read whatever it is you're naturally reading around the industry and tell me what you think. Like, give me your actual thoughts. And it can just be a line like, I found this really valuable for people in X industry. Share, that's a piece of content you've created. And then you can share that on Instagram stories. You can share that on Twitter. You can share it wherever. And that's, going down that repurposing road. But it just takes one moment of being helpful. Because even that's content. And I think people are like, oh, well, what if I don't have a thought? It's like, what do you think would be helpful to somebody else that's your friend? What would you share privately with your friend in your space? Why not just put it out there? Like, oh, I found this really helpful. Here you go. And then it can blow up.
Brittany is a strong advocate of using her platform to bring voices you might not have heard to the forefront. She's not alone in this mission. If you haven't yet heard of Clubhouse, it's probably one of the most fulfilling places to be right now, as we're craving that human connection, those serendipitous meetings with people we may have otherwise never met. Clubhouse is also bringing to the forefront the question, how might we design for diversity on social media? Breaking down the algorithmic barriers to everyone being able to be seen and heard. In a recent episode, Eric Brynjolfsson, economist, researcher, and author of The Second Machine Age, shared this.
We have the potential to have the next 10 years be the best 10 years in human history, but it's not at all automatic. We have tools that are more powerful than any tools we've ever had before. And by definition, a tool allows you to change things. You can use it to amplify your skills and to do new things. But they aren't automatically used to make things better. It depends on what our choices are. So a really important message is not to look at AI as necessarily bad, that it's going to do terrible things, or AI necessarily good. That's equally mistaken. We have to look at AI as something that amplifies our values. And that puts a lot more weight on us thinking carefully about what we want these tools to do. We can, if we want to, use these tools to create more broadly shared prosperity, and education, something you've been working on, is a big part of that. But I don't want people to get complacent and think that we're doomed or that everything's going to work out okay.
We don't often associate creating shared prosperity with personal branding. I asked Brittany, as we think about the next 10 years, how can individuals leverage personal branding as an avenue for creating access to opportunities and in turn creating more shared prosperity?
I love this question. And just for the record, I'm a Latina. Like I totally get that. Like I've seen so much in 2020 that I don't even know where to go with this, because I'm so excited for the possibilities of voices that maybe didn't get the shot that they could have or should have or would have in a different world, that are now being heard, are now have the potential to be heard. It really requires an internet connection, access to internet. And I think from there, you can really, like, that's the thing, is like the world we grew up in. It's like, I needed to go to these schools in order to get in these rooms to have the opportunity to be, in quotes, successful. And now it's like, okay, well, if I'm strategic with my tweets or I leave smart comments on LinkedIn, a room that I could never walk into, like I might have that opportunity, or I can actually engage in those conversations. And you brought up Clubhouse, and this is where it's like, yes, you should be listening and educating yourself, but most people are consumers and not actually putting out their opinion. There's a loud minority, really, but most people aren't actually creating. And definitely in a Clubhouse, if you do have iOS and you happen to be able to get access to it, there are famous people alongside people who are just getting started in their careers, and they're able to be called on to these stages. And actually, I've been in rooms where people have gotten money, like from investors and all sorts of different things, like from Shark Tank investors actually listening to pitches from like high school students or from college students. And it really kind of just like levels the playing field entirely, because if you volunteer, because you can volunteer to raise your hand and pitch these people, and some rooms are busier than others. But if you kind of just keep putting yourself out there and keep volunteering and maybe just ask a question, it leads to a conversation, which then, if that conversation is interesting, you follow them or they follow you back, then you can DM them and just say like, hey, I took this, like I was listening to you on Clubhouse. I thought that was really great. I learned a lot. I'm a student, whatever it might be. And then you start building this relationship. And it's like somebody that you would never have access to. It's hard for people who have access to people to have access to these people. And if there's just certain people that you want to meet, they're available. You just need to do a little bit of legwork and know are they doing Clubhouse? Are they on LinkedIn? Like, where are they kind of living? And be curious. I think that's a big thing too, especially for people who want to get in front of certain people. It's about being curious and not about pitching yourself. It's about wanting to know more about them and thinking about them in order to do that. I don't care, like in terms of the hiring, it's like, I don't care who you work for. I don't care what school you went to. It doesn't matter. It's about like, can you articulate yourself? Can you do whatever do you have those skill sets? And so I think I think we're going to see that a lot with Clubhouse, where people who maybe they're not classic marketers, or maybe they don't know marketing, but they know how to answer the question, or they show up and they're going to get in front of people who can change their lives. And that's just through content and having, your contact information. You need your contact information in the profile, which means you need some sort of brand positioning at least.
One of the most eye-opening experiences for me on Clubhouse has been hearing so many new voices who aren't always active on other platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Brittany shares one of the reasons for this is, are we willing to show up? I asked her to share her thoughts on why Clubhouse has drawn in diverse voices and conversations. She highlights that there's a skills gap that sometimes exists on other platforms and begins to share what we can begin to do so that we can develop that confidence and clarity in growing our voice across multiple platforms.
I mean, I'm thinking about multiple examples of what you've also been seeing. I think some people just don't take the time to to put out content, or, they make the time excuse, like, oh, I don't need to position my personal brand. Like, I'm busy doing XYZ, or, oh, my people kind of discredit themselves a lot of times, or the things that come easy to you, you think come easy to, I've done this myself. I'm like, oh, everybody knows this, but that's actually my gift. Not everybody knows that. The majority of people don't know that. That's what it is. And I think Clubhouse is interesting because audio is nice for a lot of people because it seems you're not on camera. You're not being seen. You are raising your hand and you're speaking, but you don't need to be as polished. And so I think for a lot of people, again, this comes back to having those original thoughts. They maybe can't sit and create a content calendar and think about what might be valuable for a specific audience, but they've been out there doing the work in the real world in whatever role or position they've been in, or building whatever business. And they're in a scenario where there's a conversation happening and they can add value, or they actually have a thought that they want to share that they're like, oh, this is relevant. And so it's hard to create in a vacuum. And so having those conversations, like solo episodes, I'm just totally tangent, but also related. Solo episodes for me are harder than doing interviews and having conversations. I'd always rather have somebody to kind of be that sounding board or have a reaction in order to get my creativity going. Otherwise, it's like, well, what do I have to say about personal brand? It's hard for everybody. Like, I don't care who you are, and especially a personal brand, when you're like, a lot of people start thinking like, oh, it's me and myself. And then you get into your head and you get in your own way. When it kind of, the Clubhouse opens that channel where you're riffing off of somebody else. You're not just standing there talking, waiting for people to show up like on an IG Live where you're like, okay, here's a theme and I'm just going to wait for people to ask me questions. There's an actual conversation happening or people there that can start facilitating. And then it inspires thoughts. So I like that. It's more of like a think tank. And that's probably why they're not just like, that's why I like people engaging and starting out being comfortable commenting. Like on Twitter, it's better if you go and you find the people that are interesting to you or whatever it might be. And you don't need to put out your own original tweet first. You can, again, quote retweet, or you can leave a comment because that kind of gets the juices flowing. I just don't think you can be creative in a vacuum. And I don't think you can be creative without living life, which we were actually talking about before the podcast.
Across all of Brittany's platforms, and in particular her podcast, Beyond Influential, she predicted and has been advocating for us to adapt and lean into a key trend identified last year by the World Economic Forum, a relationship between leadership and social influence. These two things could have been isolated, yet they were grouped together. I asked Brittany to provide insight about why the relationship between leadership and social influence is a non-negotiable when leading in today's world.
To me, influence is trust. I'm intentional. I don't use the word influencer because I think that definitely conjures up a lot of ideas for people. But influence now is online because at this point, like personal branding online is non-negotiable, especially like now in this world, given COVID and all of this. Like, I think it changed a lot of mindsets when everybody had to kind of work from home and work remotely and that sort of thing. So even if you had, let's say you had in quotes or have influence in real life, you were kind of just stating it then. You were like, oh, well, when we talk about Clubhouse, it's like, how come I've never heard of this person? And I think like people are looking to find these leaders to follow and trust online who are true experts in their space. And they're going online to find them because that's how you find people now. Like leaders are online and there are plenty of leaders offline, but that's why people who have been established, if you have actual experience, there's also a lot of fakery online. And so I love meeting people who it's like, I've never heard of you. Let's get you online. Like, let's position you in a way where you don't have to spend all this time online, but you can spend some time and people know that you're legit. They know that they can trust you in this area. And I think influence is transferable. Like if you grow your trust in one area, you can bring it with you. It grows with you. It's like having that resume carry with you. It's just so important. And since people are looking for leaders online, people are looking for people to step up, people are looking for strong voices. The majority of people follow people. They're not leading people. And so that's the opportunity. People are looking for people to follow in all of these different areas. And there's so many people spend so much time online and on their phones. It's like, why wouldn't you be where the attention's at? Like, to me, that is like, it is social capital, and social capital is now it is online, and you see it with Clubhouse. You see like certain people know a bunch of these other specific people, and they are all in a room together. And it's just like more obvious than ever who's connected to who.
What resonated most about what Brittany shared was the importance of trust. I asked Brittany to go deeper on this and to share strategies that help leaders develop social trust with their audiences.
Content is proof. And so that's kind of what I was saying with the gatekeepers. It's like the great thing about content, let's say I kind of use this example where it's like, if I say I work in personal branding, and let's say I have a boss and they're like, she sucks or whatever, you can make your own determination whether or not you agree with his opinion, or whether I've demonstrated through years of content and other types of results and other things. Basically, I can take it to the people. And so that's the greatest possible thing, is that content creates that. And I'd like to talk about consistency, but I also know that people get freaked out by this idea of needing to be everywhere all of the time. And they kind of take consistency to mean they need to be posting 7 days a week, like all everywhere. But trust comes from, and this is why I think clarity is so important and positioning yourself. Trust comes from, you want people to be consistent. And I think that's when you really are self-aware and you're showing up. I hate the word authenticity sometimes, that it's been played out so much, but when you're showing up as you don't have to act like anything else. And it's easy to show up consistently across platforms, and people know what they're getting. People want to know what they're getting at the end of the day. And they want to know that if they hire you, whatever, work with you, talk to you, that they're getting what they see when they're like working with you, in quotes, in real life, or dealing with you in real life, or meeting you in real life. And I think that's what builds the trust, showing up in a way that it's like, you're reliable and you talk about these things. And that's all that it really takes. I honestly think consistency beats out talent and skill.
Consistency beats talent and skill, she says. Earlier, Brittany also reminded us that enthusiasm trumps experience. Can you tell that there's a theme here? Yet one of the hardest parts of what we've experienced over the last year, and what we continue to experience, has presented a challenge to our creativity, our consistency, and our enthusiasm. As someone who leans in closely to the work that Brittany does, I just want to commend, respect, and so appreciate her for doing what so few did last year: taking a pause. 2020 disrupted our lives and the lives of those around us in ways previously unimaginable. I asked Brittany to share her personal experience with 2020, which she does with tremendous generosity, vulnerability, and honesty, exemplifying the very qualities that make her a woman who leads by example when we think about what it means to be a leader who has social influence.
Oh yeah, 2020 was definitely, staying inside is not conducive to creativity. I feel like there was a point in 2020 where I definitely so my zone of genius is on the more creative, strategic side. I love creating content and having conversations. But during 2020, I had to be also building a team and kind of learning these other operational aspects of my business and scaling. And those aren't necessarily certain areas of genius. And so it's like you're learning, but you're kind of living in it. It takes a lot of entrepreneurship, actually takes a lot of work. And there's all of these different areas of business that goes into what you see and don't see. And so for me, I definitely took December completely off, basically, or as much as I possibly could, because I really got into some unhealthy habits, if I'm being honest, in 2020, where I just kind of start working, because I did work from home, right, like so many other people, but I had those outlets of traveling or being able to work out and have my routine, and all of those things, just like everyone else, were stripped from me. And so I just kind of started working all the time. And when you're working all the time and you're not kind of getting the inputs that you need or the feedback, and you're working in a vacuum, it's just not like, I just started feeling unhealthy and I just wasn't feeling inspired. And then you go to whatever, Instagram, or you go to whatever platform, and you see people just putting things out, and it's like, I don't even want to it's like not even interesting, but it's not inspiring either. I think you can get into these holes. So for me, I've actually been doing a lot of work on myself over the last few months because I really was starting to feel burnt. I would say I would use the word burnt out. I would say I was feeling burnt out. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm just working to work. What do I actually want to be doing? Like, what's my actual vision? Like, what makes me happy? All of the questions that you have to revisit again and again and again. So all of the clarity work that I've talked about today, that's work that I'm doing now and that I've been doing now. And something important that I wanted to bring up, if you're not creating content, so my thoughts on a personal brand there are three things that go into it. Mindset is like a fourth bonus, but the first is clarity, 2 is the consistent content, and 3 is community. And that's the engagement piece. And like I was saying before, at least engaging with people and kind of getting out of your bubble or your head kind of compensates for those other areas and being able to like network. I feel like in 2020, I got really into kind of my own head, knowing that like I create content, trying to create content, but because I wasn't having those social interactions that were, I guess, high quality social interactions, I wasn't feeling creative. And so something that I've been doing, besides I stopped, I took a step back. I'm like, what makes me happy? What do I really want to be doing? A big thing that I've been doing since the start of the year is scheduling in conversations with people who I want to learn from, who I respect, who I already know in my network, but I haven't taken the time to have these conversations. And just making sure I have at least 1 or 2 a week. And it's not even like, oh, hey, I want to collaborate with you or whatever that ends up happening as a result. But it's just having how can I have meaningful interactions that make me feel fulfilled? I know that fulfills me because I took a look in December, like, what have I liked doing this year? What have I liked doing in my business over the last few years? And it just kept coming back to, I love creating content and strategy, and I love having conversations, but neither exists without the other for me. Like, content comes from the conversations and vice versa. And so doing that, and then also something else that I've been doing is I finally found a good therapist. I think it's important to have somebody who you can speak to, who kind of isn't on, if you're an entrepreneur, who isn't on your payroll, who isn't your family, who doesn't have a personal stake or has certain opinions or expectations for what they think you should be doing or what their path is that can kind of put that on you. And I've been really focusing on, I'm a thinker. Like, I think through things, and my way of trying to solve anything is to go to my thoughts. I've been trying to get really good at going into my body, if that makes sense. And knowing, like, I've been doing a lot of self-compassion work, but also just like body scans. And if I feel or think any kind of emotion, where is it showing up in my body? And really kind of getting acquainted with that, because I think I just kind of push through things. And it's really important to listen to our bodies. And I know that for me, and being an academic and that sort of thing is where I want to go. But I ignore these other signs that I think that would help optimize even the thinking. And so definitely, I think right now, if depending on what type of personality you are, I always recommend that people learn, because this is something I really didn't learn. I don't really know how to relax. I was never somebody who prioritized relaxation, or really somebody like my hobby is work, or like I made what I do is what I love. And that can be healthy and that can be unhealthy. So I kind of had to reevaluate all of that this year.
I am so impressed by the fact that you actually did that for yourself, because I feel like in so many environments that I'm in, it's just everybody's just trying to go, solve. But you actually can't solve meaningfully. And it's such a beautiful, like, full circle you almost brought us to, because we kind of started this conversation around this idea of how your personal brand allows you to sort of live up to your purpose, find your voice. But that also takes, you also have to pause, right? To be able to kind of reflect on, okay, well, what do I want? Who do I want to be? What energizes me? What brings me joy? What doesn't bring me joy? And what doesn't energize me? To be able to begin kind of going down that pathway. So I found it such a like beautiful full circle. And
I want to say that this is hard. Like, I just want to make that clear. Like, just stopping. Like, I didn't just stop and like smell the roses. Like, I I got in the habit of go, go, go. And my whole thing at this point, it's like, okay, if something's not working, let's change it up. Let's pivot. Let's do this. That's my energy. And so for me, I need to bring it back. I started saying no to things, even if I want to do them. I had a membership. I haven't talked about this in beta for basically, I started in 2020. 2020 ended up being different than I expected. And so my attention was in different places. And this month, it's like when you've built a personal brand and you've built that trust with people, I was just honest. And I was like, I'm going to pause this right now. Like I'm not charging you this month. Like you'll have access to everything we've done over the last year, but I've got to figure out what needs to happen next. And I needed systems so I had put out my podcast it's 3 years old now. And I love it. It's my favorite thing that I do beyond influential. And I was putting it out every week, doing all I have my editor help me, but it's like, I was just on this grind and I really hadn't developed, because organization and system and processes are not my thing so much. I hadn't stopped to finish out that process and get it in place so that I wouldn't burn out. And so that's why it's like, I have to stop in order to scale. I have to stop in order to hit my next level. If I do not stop and I don't do this work, I'm not going to get where I want to be. There's no possible way. So I basically told my list, I told my listeners, it's like, I'm taking this break and I'm coming back, and people are excited for it to stop and come back. They're like, oh, can't wait for it to come back. And that's what that brand equity, we didn't really touch on that. But once you're building your personal brand and people know you as this person and you're consistent as this person and you're showing up and you're adding value, they'll be there if you need to take a break, and they'll understand that you're a human being who maybe needs to take a break, or maybe and people evolve with you. Like there are going to be people who are totally down for it, and there are going to be new people who come in with your evolution, and maybe people who, go somewhere else. And all of that's part of this experience. And it's hard. It is hard when you're looking around and it looks like everybody's putting out all of this content all of the time. And you're like, oh my God, if I pause, I'm going to become irrelevant and everybody's going to forget about me. But if you're going to be unhealthy and not be able to put out any content, then you have to stop. Like you just have to prioritize yourself over other people in that way. And then they'll be there if they're meant to be there.
If there's one takeaway I hope you'll consider from this conversation, it's that there's power in taking a pause. Whether we're thinking of taking a day off from work or a day off from social media, it can often feel as if the world won't move forward without us, which we've all learned isn't true. Brittany highlights the importance of self-care. I asked Brittany, as people consider taking a pause, designing their personal brands, what piece of advice would you give them?
I want to encourage your audience to reach out if there is a question or a specific thing. Like that's what this, ultimately it's about. Like I think personal branding in general is about communication and connection. It's about communicating. So feel free to reach out and ask your question. That's the thing. It's like not what I want to share with you. It's what do you want me to share with you, knowing what you know now? Like, what are you curious about? And that's what makes me curious. And then we have a conversation. So I love those kinds of things.
As leaders, it's one of our responsibilities to be aware of emerging trends. It's why week after week, I strive to bring you some of the best people across different industries to have conversations with us here on the podcast so we can learn from them and take those lessons back to the work it is that we do. I hope you'll reach out to Brittany, listen into her podcast, and one of the best ways to connect with her is by visiting her website, which I'll link for you in the show notes. It's www.brittanycrystle.com, or tag her in Instagram in one of our stories where you tell us some of the things that you liked about today's episode or a question that you have. You can tag Brittany at @BrittanyCrystle, KRYSTLE on Instagram. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to her podcast, Beyond Influential. It's one of the ones where I learn so much about how to build trust and influence with my audience week after week. Each episode now feels incomplete without discussing the importance of curiosity. As I've mentioned before, it's a theme that comes up in every single interview. Brittany shares one final thought about why curiosity is the difference that makes a difference.
Be curious. Cultivate curiosity about everything. I don't think that's necessarily encouraged in certain educational settings, depending on where you grew up or went to school. But I think that that's been one of the most valuable skill sets and things that I've cultivated over the last few years. And I've gotten to ask questions and be curious about people in a genuine way. And people are excited to share their stories and their knowledge. And really, that's how the connections are made. So I think that just being curious about people and different fields, and wherever you can be curious and ask a question, do it.
Okay, so now I'm going to have to ask you one more question since you brought that up. It's so interesting. Every single person who has come on the podcast so far has mentioned curiosity as the difference that made a difference for them. So, and it's so funny. I spent the past last year in 2020, a good portion of it with my nephew, who's 2 years old, in London. And watching him, we always hear, Sir Ken Robinson is most famous for saying, "We kill creativity out of kids." And I never actually understood exactly what that looked like. I knew what it meant, but I never understood what that actually looked like until I got to spend, I lived with I was staying at my sister's house. So until I lived with him for 3 months, just the most curious, every single child is born curious. It is the most natural instinct that we have. And you're right. I think along the way, Sir Ken Robinson says, you said, it gets taken away. So what advice do you have? If somebody was okay, but how do I be curious? A lot of people don't even know where to start, yet it's within us. What are some starting points you would recommend for people?
So I can get super excited about anything. So I'm trying to think how I would reverse engineer that. But when you actually mentioned this about curiosity, I do think about one thing in particular, personal branding, that changed everything for me. A lot of times I look at my story and I'm like, oh, was it? At first I thought it was maybe working for Gary kind of shifted my mindset in these ways. The biggest game changer ever was starting to build my own personal brand. It wasn't working on anyone else's. It was building my own was what changed the game. And part of that was the podcast where I get to be curious. And so those things were the game changer for me in my business. And especially if you are trying to develop a business and you're trying to develop a brand and let's say you want to grow an audience, you need curiosity in order to build that audience, to know what their pain points are, to know what solutions you offer, to just know what value you can offer. So I think where you start is by having conversations with people you think you might just have interesting conversations with, depending on if you're in a certain area or not. That's why I like the idea of podcasting, because you can have these conversations and just thinking about what would I want to know? If I had 5 minutes in a room with this person, what would I ask them? I think that's how you cultivate curiosity. What would get you excited? Who would be super exciting for you to be in a room with and have 5 minutes with, or 3 minutes, or whatever it might be? Or what industries are you interested in? Like I said, I can kind of hype myself up about anything, which is why I love what I do in the podcast space. But that's how you cultivate curiosity, is just, what are you, even the books, what are you gravitating toward? I would just kind of take those moments and pause and ask yourself, why? Or what am I doing now? And I don't want to talk about mindfulness. That's a whole other thing. But living in the present and okay, I just did this, or I just read this. Do I want to know more? Who wrote this? How did they get to where they got to write a book on this? How did they get to be an expert, or whatever it might be? Just start asking questions, because I do think it gets kind of beaten out of us at some point. I don't know when exactly it does, but it definitely does. I always tell people I'd rather have a great question or the right question than the right answer. I don't know. I really, and this is funny talking to you about it, because I don't think I appreciated education until the last few years, actually finding joy in learning myself and asking those questions. Curiosity brought that to me, but I I didn't feel open to asking questions when I worked in certain environments or in certain places. And school was a way to get me to where I needed to be. I wasn't thinking about it that way, but now I can appreciate it. And I think that comes from asking questions and actually learning and having those insights. Even just one insight from someone else, you're like, oh, let me ask you more questions. It's just like opens your mind and kind of inspires you to start digging deeper.
Whether you're starting your personal brand or you've had it for a while, I want you to think about, who do you serve and what problem do you help solve? Tag Brittany and I online or come join us on Clubhouse and let us know. Remember, as Brittany shared, the world needs you, your voice, and your experience. And the only way to gain clarity is to begin by taking action. It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you still have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Sprint to Success with Design Thinking community.